Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Skip Koenig. I am the Pro Bono Director at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County, and I also supervise our disaster assistance team. And I have three of our attorneys with us here this evening who will put on or talk to you about the disaster preparedness here in the San Fernando Valley. Before we get to our presentation, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the Assembly Member for District 39, where our office in Pacoima is located. Assembly Member Rivas, someone we've worked with and someone we're incredibly proud of for all of her work, really leading the effort in California on not just disaster preparedness, but most especially heat resilience and heat-related events. She's really been out in front on that issue for a number of years, had some successes this year in the legislature, putting California first in the nation on some important pieces of legislation that we couldn't be more proud of having her as our Assembly Member. So with that, it's my privilege to introduce Assemblymember Rivas.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm Assemblymember Luz Rivas. I represent the Northeast San Fernando Valley. It's my home where I grew up in. My family's home was actually down the street from Neighborhood Legal Services, years ago. And so very excited to join you today in this very important workshop. In the Assembly, I serve as the chair for natural resources. It's an important issue area for our community. This is a community that suffers from injustice in terms of environmental issues, poor air quality, there's other type of pollution, and that's why it's important to me. And then when we talk about climate change, a lot of times we hear it's something that's going to happen in the future. In 25 years, 40 years, we set goals for dates in the future, like 2045. But it's actually happening today. And climate change is affecting our communities. It's affecting the San Fernando Valley. And that's why, as a legislator, I chose to take action on the issue of extreme heat. And I introduced AB 2238 this year that will establish a statewide heat ranking system to provide our communities with advanced warning when there's extreme heat events. Something similar to what is done in states where there are hurricanes, where they have a ranking system and the public knows how to prepare based on what they hear on the news and in other communications channels. And that's what we want for heat for California, because it's getting hotter and hotter every year. And what we've been doing in the past, those of us that grew up without air conditioning, we had our DIY ways of staying cool with our fans and wetting, towels and placing them on ourselves, sleeping outside in the backyard. That's no longer going to work. And that's why I feel it's the state's responsibility to take action. And fortunately, the governor signed my bill. And soon we will have this heat ranking system that will save lives and will help our most vulnerable communities. Because these vulnerable communities, we're already suffering from the impacts of climate change, and especially through extreme heat. And I worked with our insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, on this bill, and it was recently signed by Governor Newsom. And I'm very proud, when I've met with the team at Neighborhood Legal Services, they were very interested in working with me on this legislation, on this issue area, because they know firsthand, being based in Pacoima in the San Fernando Valley, how people suffer from these emergencies, these extreme weather events. Just in 2020, LA County reached a temperature of 121 degrees. And that was in the West San Fernando Valley and Woodland Hills, down the street from us. And so we've learned that heat waves are silent killers. They cause more deaths than any other extreme weather event in our country. And we're taking action. And that's why I'm glad to join this workshop today, because my friends here at Neighborhood Legal Services are going to explain different ways to prepare for emergency disasters, and also what services they already provide. And I just want to let everyone know, if there's anything we can do to help you with any state service, my office is in Arleta. My district team is ready to serve and to help. Things with the DMV, EDD, or if you just want to talk about legislation, or if you have any ideas for us. I will continue working on extreme heat. I've worked with several partners and advocates and organizations on this issue. And we're just working to better serve our communities, to make sure that everyone stays cool, is properly hydrated, and that we are preparing also our local governments. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you to Neighborhood Legal Services, to my team, and to everyone involved in making this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember, and just again, thank you for your leadership on this important issue, not just disaster preparedness, but as you've so eloquently explained, the heat-related events. And we appreciate your leadership and vision on this. I'm going to thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
And I'm going to turn it over to Drew Tapia of our disaster preparedness team to walk us through this program tonight.
And thank you, Skip, and thank you so much, Assemblymember Rivas, for sharing not just some background on yourself, but also the work that you and your office have been getting done lately. And before I get started, I do just want to apologize since I am presenting. My video will be off. My co-presenters should be able to show themselves to you, but I would block the screen, so I do apologize for that. But as the Assembly member said, the Disaster Assistance Project team from Neighborhood Legal Services is here to check in, give some introductory information and an overview of disaster preparedness on a realm of different issues. And so just looking at this evening's agenda, we'll start with 5 basic tips. I know it's not on the agenda before working into disaster and extreme heat preparedness, workers' rights during disasters, public safety power shutoffs, also known as PSPS, various issues with consumer protections during disasters, medical insurance issues in disasters, and then a few minutes for Q&A if there are any outstanding questions. I know that the Assembly member and Skip gave a little bit of information about NLS and what we do, but just before we get started with everything, wanted to make sure everyone is aware exactly what services we provide and where we provide them. So we are a nonprofit law firm providing free legal services throughout LA County. We have about 80 lawyers on staff, and our advocates can assist with representation in a plethora of languages outside of English. I will leave this screen on there for a second. We have both the disaster relief hotline that is specific. If you have any issues that are similar to what we're presenting on, please give that line a call. Someone on our team here will certainly follow up and help you out however we can. Otherwise, there's also the General Legal Assistance Hotline, and that number can be used to address one of these various issues on the screen. And so NLS, again, this is a disaster assistance and preparedness presentation, but NLS does have the ability to help with much more than that. And so We can also share where NLS is located. We have offices in Pacoima, El Monte, Glendale, and Boyle Heights. We also have great relationships and can provide services in the Antelope Valley area. NLS does also work and oversees a couple of these self-help centers in LA County. And there are 4 staffed healthcare centers to help with any healthcare issues, including billing or any other issues related to the medical process. And so now focusing more onto what you're here for, the disaster preparedness. Like I said, just wanted to begin the very, very basic overview and 5 tips to prepare for disasters. These tips are not specific to any type of disaster, but just really great practices to make life easier should you be faced with disaster recovery. So first 2 of these, number 1, starting with make a plan. You're here, that's great, or you're watching this recording, which means that you're already interested in finding out more about disaster recovery and what you can do to be ready for it. Different ways to make a plan other than just writing things down or knowing what to do, but have items ready to go, whether it's medication, important family heirlooms, things like that. Know where they are, and just be ready to have certain items that you know you'll need ready to go with you. The second tip is take pictures of items you know. Pictures, or most people can film videos on their phone now. Even walking through, taking a video of your house or just knowing what is inside before disaster hits can really make the whether it's a FEMA application or a local assistance application, it can make the recovery process so much simpler by really knowing and being able to show possessions that you had before the disaster hit. The next 2, so we'll start with making sure title is in your name. So if you are the owner of a car, a house, a motorhome, or mobile home, always make sure that titles for that property is in your name. When that disaster recovery begins, you'll be applying for damages to any of those items. You will need to certainly show that they are in your name, that you are the legal owner. And mobile homeowners, there is specific information. There are some specific exceptions and rules for mobile homes. So just always making sure, as part of that first tip of preparing a plan, know what rules apply to the type of property that you're dealing with. Number 4, get insurance. This would be a great thing to do at the same time as number 3 while you're checking titles, insuring any valuable property, whether it's home, car, etc. Always make sure, if it's something that you can afford, to insure items. Again, this simplifies disaster recovery, as insurance is usually one of the first waves of disaster recovery that we see, some of the first waves of available money. So having items insured will only make disaster recovery easier in the long run. And then finally, keep important papers, documents in a safe place. Again, in disaster recovery, you're mostly going to be dealing with large government organizations or corporations, whether it's FEMA or insurance providers, and being able, again, to prove who you are, that you are the owner, and that you have standing to request recovery is very important. So just to really highlight some of these things: passports, driver's license, and really social security and birth certificates, any documents relating to homeowner or renting, immigration documents, wills, trusts, and then any custody orders and other documents relating to your children in the home. And so those were the 5 kind of basic tips for general disasters. the assembly member and her team talked about some of the top issues that individuals in her community are facing. And so we'll start to jump into some of those more specific issues. I think one thing that everybody throughout LA County has been dealing with, even though we are almost halfway through October as of right now, extreme heat. And so looking at extreme heat preparedness, this is not a new issue, but it's certainly one that has been getting increased attention. And so there are opportunities and certainly ways to help stay cool if you don't have access to air conditioning in your home, whether it's an AC unit or central air conditioning. And so just a few general tips to stay cool. Cover windows with shades, drink plenty of fluids. You might think that closing the window would be enough, but that sunlight still getting in is heating up the room. So just try to make sure if you have extra sheets, if you don't have shades on your windows, cover those up. And even if you're not thirsty, even if you feel like you're doing well, just always make sure you're drinking plenty of water. Dehydration is an extremely easy thing to get in this extreme heat, especially when it's 100 degrees throughout the day for several days. Another tip is to locate public areas with air conditioning, whether that is libraries, local sports centers. There are certainly those large buildings that are publicly accessible that will have air conditioning on while they're open. And then next couple tips can be grouped in together. Individuals at high risk of heat illness, infants, seniors, and then we can also add in any pets that people have. Knowing that infants and seniors should always be the priority, but pets also keep in mind when you are preparing that emergency and disaster preparedness plan that we talked about, to make a plan for pets, whether it's to know a local emergency shelter if you are unable to return to your home, or just having a go bag for your pet with food, a bottle of water, anything else that they might need for a few days. And then final thing for staying cool is to wear appropriate clothing and using sunscreen. Heat and sun-related illnesses. Obviously, some of the most basic things we can be doing is using sun protection and then trying to avoid heavy clothing. Obviously, there are some jobs, professions where long pants, long sleeves, outdoor are necessary. So those are the times, just make sure you are drinking plenty of water and staying safe. There are available cooling centers throughout LA County. Some of these centers can include the public libraries, areas with large amounts of shade. And so calling 311, 211, or visiting LA County's heat site will show certain open cooling center. These centers will open in times of extreme heat. And so please take advantage of these resources. They are there. And they should absolutely be utilized instead of staying in a place that is dangerously hot for you or your family. Finally, there is the Notify LA, the emergency alert system. As a part of that emergency alert system, that will include the general major disasters you think of, fires, earthquakes. But now with how common extreme heat is and the impact that it's having on LA and its community, there is an early warning system for extreme heat. You can at least get a heads up about, when that extreme heat wave is coming in. And so you can start calling 211, 311, or visit that, the heat site that we previously saw to make your plans to access one of those cooling centers or find a place to stay cool. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jacob to talk about workers' rights.
Thank you, Drew. So my name is Jacob Zarewski, and I am the Equal Justice Works Disaster Resilience Fellow at Neighborhood Legal Services. Now I will be discussing some quick know your rights tips relating to workers' rights, specifically for wildfire smoke and extreme heat events. So just a quick overview of the subjects that I will be touching on. First off, what are these worker protections? As I mentioned, the two disasters that we will be focusing on are wildfires and extreme heat events. So I'll be discussing who is eligible for these protections, the exceptions for the eligibility, and at the end, myself and Drew will give a quick explanation of how to file a workers' rights complaint with Cal OSHA, that's the California Division of Occupational Safety and Health. So I want to mention at the outset that these slides are very technical, and it's important to note that as an individual, as a layperson, it's not important to know the specific statute provisions. It's not important to know the specific numbers for when employers have to check the air. But with that being said, the graphic on your screen, that is what is known as AQI, or the air quality index. So following a wildfire, once the dust is settled, the air quality is generally unsafe to breathe. It's hazardous, and obviously the closer you are to the fire, the more hazardous the air is. From the outset, following a wildfire, an employer must check the AQI at the beginning of each shift and periodically afterwards. So those that are eligible are outdoor workers. So those that would be outdoor for more than 1 hour, exposed workers, vehicles, delivery drivers, those that would be moving inside and outside frequently. So those are the individuals that are eligible for these worker rights protections. Now you'll see with this slide and the next slide, these protections are bifurcated into two different sections. So the first, when the air quality is not as hazardous, but still considered unsafe to breathe, that level of protection requires employers to offer masks during wildfire smoke. However, employees are not required to wear them. Under more severe smoke conditions, then masks must not only be provided, but also used by employees. And it's the duty of the employer to check the air quality index, to provide the masks, and to periodically check on these employees. So although this presentation is geared toward the employee, it is really up to the employer to ensure the safety of their employees. So as I mentioned, the first and less hazardous, but still unsafe AQI is anything over 151. And in this case, masks must be provided. Otherwise, the work site must be changed to provide more ventilation, for example, more time indoors and less exposure. Anything over 501 is considered very hazardous and unsafe to breathe. And that is when employers are required to provide personal protective equipment, so masks, other forms of ventilation. So anything over 501 And again, employers should have a system in place. They should be trained on how to track these mechanisms, and following a wildfire, they should be doing this periodically. So just some quick exceptions. These protections do not apply for firefighters and other emergency responders. However, for those outdoor employees, this would almost always apply. So now I'll be talking about how to mitigate the damage from extreme heat events. As the Assemblywoman mentioned, this is the silent killer, and given the past few months living in Southern California, we all know the devastating impact of extreme heat events. These are actually some relatively new provisions, also meant for outdoor workers. And again, employers are required to comply with this standard. So they must be trained and understand the impact of extreme heat, and they must have an emergency plan in place when the temperature goes above 80 degrees. And once again, there are even further protections when it gets over 95 degrees. The most important protections are access to water at all times, cool down periods. So that is a 10-minute break every 2 hours generally. And there must always be access to shade where it's feasible. And of course, the employer needs to check the health and well-being of employees. If an employee says they're not feeling well, for example, and are conveying other heat illness symptoms, it is the responsibility of the employer to recognize that fact and to take the necessary precautions. Again, I touched on this, access to shade. So it must be present when the temperature exceeds 80 degrees. If it's not feasible, they must provide an alternative procedure to access that shade. And then finally, Cal OSHA complaints. So these, when an employer violates these terms, these protections, individuals can file a workplace safety complaint with the California Occupational Safety and Health Division. And I will pass it to my colleague Drew to explain a little bit more how that process works.
Thank you, Jacob. And so just following up on how important the Cal OSHA complaint is in the process, we really wanted to highlight that this is not something or a process that employees should feel bad or scared about doing. Obviously, this is about your own personal safety and health, or for your family members if they are concerned. And so we did just want to really stress the Cal OSHA complaints and just highlight a few things to note for this process. So again, this is how to start the worksite investigation or complaint. And so specifically, since we've been talking about air quality and wildfire smoke, one thing to note, and Jacob touched on, is I think one pattern that people living in Los Angeles County have fallen into, and I certainly have, is once there's a fire in our area, simply checking air quality through the smell test. The very small air particles that Jacob briefly explained often or sometimes can't be picked up. And so the smell test just is not enough. And so really with this air quality and wildfire, if there isn't a fire or any air quality issue in your area, always check the air quality .gov site that Jacob went over, or if it's even in your area of employment. If you are concerned, you can follow the link on the slide or call Cal OSHA. And just really something to highlight for this process, it is not only for outdoor workers. Indoor workers may have, I don't want to say less protections, but there are certain exceptions for indoor workers, simply because it's a requirement of air filtration and conditioning for the indoors. So just because you work inside does not mean you cannot file a claim when there is wildfire, but it is something to just look out for. And so the last point that we really wanted to stress for Cal OSHA complaints, and similar, it's a theme of disaster recovery and preparedness, is making sure you note everything that will be a part of your complaint. If you have had a conversation with your employer about your concerns and they did nothing, or if they did something, make sure you record that. If you have sent complaints and never heard back, make sure you record that. And so we just really want to stress that the Cal OSHA complaint is something, again, that you should not be afraid of or worried about. Employers cannot retaliate because you are concerned about workplace safety. But it is important to be as prepared as you can be coming into this complaint and investigation process. And so knowing that that was a lot that we just threw at you, if you need assistance or you are going through this complaint, please call NLS for assistance. You can call the number below or go to nlsla.org. So now moving on, the next topic for disaster recovery is consumer protections in disasters. And beginning with consumer protection, we'll start with price gouging. Unfortunately, following an emergency, oftentimes you will see individuals, businesses use that as an opportunity to make money. They know people thinking about COVID specifically, the beginning days of COVID, hand sanitizer, toilet paper. Those are items that people really needed. And so price gouging would be charging a ridiculous amount of money for what the item is. And so we do have price gouging protections for consumers in California. And so one such protection is for 180 days after a declaration of a state of emergency. There is a 10% increase limit on those extremely important or essential goods following a disaster. And because it is so important, these protections, I do just want to note, those are things like food, fuel, and then shelter, but also specifically contracting work and repairs. It's important to note that if a wildfire sweeps through a neighborhood, a contractor who normally charges a certain price for repairs can't go and triple that amount just because he knows people need it. And so always just be aware, keep an eye out. We always hope that people around us, especially after a disaster, are there to help. But unfortunately, there are sometimes those bad apples. And so if you notice anything, or if in your own disaster recovery experience, which we hope you never have to deal with, you do experience something like this, please contact the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. They will assist with enforcing price gouging laws and make sure that others don't have to experience the same issues that you do. The second aspect of consumer protection in disasters and recovery is food security. And really a great and basic tip to prepare for that is applying to CalFresh ahead of the event. There are certainly limitations. Not every Californian is going to be able to receive CalFresh, but if you are able to receive those benefits before the disaster, that is certainly the best way to make sure that when the disaster strikes, you have means of getting yourself food. Going off that with CalFresh, if you are a current CalFresh recipient at the time of a disaster, and you lose food because of disasters, whether it's earthquakes, fires, or the PSPS shutoffs that William will talk about in a moment. Sometimes refrigerators stop working, food goes bad. You can request replacement CalFresh specifically for disaster purposes. Another opportunity for food assistance both before and during disasters is the WIC supplement. Again, we would recommend that if you can receive those services, those benefits, absolutely apply before the event. For obvious reasons, the CalFresh, the WIC benefits will see a huge increase following disasters where people may lose jobs or loved ones. And so having that benefit or being able to have that service before the disaster hits again is only beneficial. Same type of thing, you can request replacement benefits if any are lost due to disaster. You can call your local agency to request those replacements. Lastly, in addition to the two other services, we have CalFresh, which is, I apologize, the DCalFresh, and this is the disaster declaration. And this is for people who aren't already on CalFresh. And this is where there is the disaster declaration, the disruption and food supply chains, or when there's just a general state approval. And so the eligibility requirements are less strict than CalFresh. And so again, that's the purpose of DCalFresh opening after a declaration. The lesser eligibility requirements only require you to have some sort of food loss, disaster or loss of income, and then damage to personal property. And with that, I will now pass it over to my colleague, William, who will talk about PSPS.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone who's presented so far. Good evening, everyone. I'm William Simonsick. I'm the legal technology attorney here at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. I'm here tonight to talk a bit about de-energization, otherwise known as public safety power shutoffs. I'd like to say from the onset, this is different than the sort of rolling blackout situation that we were facing about a month ago. Those are less extended time-wise. So you're really looking more at cooling centers if it's hot, that sort of thing, city, county response. So what is a public safety power shutoff? If you've experienced it, horrible, very frustrating. But at a very basic level, it's what happens when the power is shut off because there's a sort of risk of wildfire that might, because of potential issues with the electrical infrastructure. Basic terms, because of high winds, for example, red flag warning, power lines might come down. So then the power will actually be turned off ahead of time. When this happens, sometimes your bill can be reduced. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The main thing is that you're supposed to receive a notification. This is a state rule actually from the Utilities Commission, who is the government agency that covers this sort of issue. You're supposed to receive notice when they announce the event, when they've made the decision that they're going to turn the power off, right before the power goes off, right about when the power is about to come on, and right after that they know that there's an all clear, that the event is over. This is a major issue. There have been serious problems with utilities not complying with this, not actually giving the proper notice. This is something that happens to you. I'm going to discuss the sort of options that are limited that you have, but I would recommend you take one of them. It is a major concern. It can be very, very dangerous, and certainly helps when discussing the sort of hardships that these events cause. Of course, as a part of the notification, you'll need up-to-date contact information. So during de-energization, there are a few services that are available. Once again, worth mentioning in terms of the different service areas, De-energization is very uncommon. I'm saying this, I don't think they've done one anytime recently. I don't know if someone in the room would know more 100% in the LADWP territory. So this is going to be more people who have Southern California Edison, otherwise PG&E, SDG&E. These events do occur pretty common during the summer. Happens a few times. If there's issues with medical devices, your health insurance may be a potential provider, someone you can go to get sort of. If you're an SE service, this is pretty similar with the others. There's community resource centers, which are little vans, little sort of. Sorry, am I internet? Okay, do you hear me? I had an internet unstable warning come on. So these are like vans, little setups, tents where you can charge your small devices like phones and things like that. You get a little goodie bag with like a solar charger in it from some of these. For larger devices, you want to go to an independent living center. These are run by the California Foundation of Independent Living Centers. They have the ability to charge larger medical equipment, and sort of stuff like wheelchairs, any sort of other respirator, things like that. They also have other services they can potentially provide. They sometimes have housing, like hotel vouchers, things like that. They're a very good resource in these events if you have a medical issue. There is in the SE territory a backup battery program. It requires you to be on the medical baseline program, which is a rate reduction program, lowers your electric bill. If you need electricity because of a medical issue, it's actually pretty broad, and it's something that if you think this might apply to you, should look up this really as soon as this workshop is over tonight. You would also need to be enrolled in CARE or FARA. These are also rate reduction programs that lower your electric bill. That's based on income. CARE being for individuals, FARA being for families. It's a little easier to get on FARA. I think it's 200% federal poverty line. May have changed, but once again, these programs, and echoing what Drew was saying with consumer protection, being on these programs ahead of time helps you when these events do happen. To be in that part of the critical care backup battery program, you would also need to be in a high fire risk area. As I said about being on programs ahead of time, saves you in the aftermath of the disaster or the event. CalFresh is one of these. Replacement CalFresh benefits may be available if you had your food spoil in your fridge, for example. This is a sort of thing because it takes a bit to get on, I think it's at least 3 to 7 days to get on CalFresh. If you're already on it, you can just apply immediately for replacement benefits. Next slide, please. So if there's a state of emergency, there are some other things that may apply. If there's a state of emergency, for example, and this will be discussed a little bit later, you have special rights where you can get replacement medication. To find out about this, you're just unfortunately going to either have to watch the news or take a look at the governor's website. If there is a state of emergency for a power shutoff, though, it probably will be in the news. Check if bill credits are available to utility. This is uncommon, but does happen, especially if there was a problem, like, for example, I discussed before about getting notice about the events. If there is, like, say, a widespread lack of notice, the CPUC, the agency that covers these things, may find the utility, but then make them do that as bill credits, right? So complain, file the complaint. The more pressure, the more likely something like this is about to happen, right? There are also other programs to potentially get backup, permanent backup power. The way this would work is your house would actually, or your apartment building would actually isolate, which is separate from the electrical grid. So you'll be able to use the backup battery. It's called the Self-Generation Incentive Program. I will say there are some problems with this program, to put it lightly. It is a rebate program, so you would have to have the money up front, and there are delays. There are, however, special grants under this program for low-income homeowners and apartment buildings, so it's still worth looking into. And I hate to be the one to say it, but the bad news is this is expected to continue for quite a while. There has been some work at the state level on hardening, basically making the power lines able to withstand high winds in these conditions. But undergrounding costs are hundreds of billions. And I know PG&E CEO, I think, was quoted saying another 10 years of these to get a sort of idea of the time frame. Next slide, please. So general disaster preparedness with any sort of utility issue. And this would include if there was a disaster. So not if your power shut off, if there's a disaster, not just if there's a power shut off. Up-to-date contact information so you can get the notice. Enroll in any programs you're eligible for. I've said it, I'll say it again. Hopefully you'll hear this multiple times. This prepares you in the aftermath of the disaster. Having to apply for CalFresh and after a disaster, a lot more difficult, more delays. Replacement benefits would be available already. Care and fair medical baseline gets special protections in when there is a disaster, as well as when their power is shut off, as well as a utility disconnection completely unrelated to weather. So it is good to be already on those programs if you're eligible. And as I said, a lot more people are eligible for fair medical baseline than generally think. Make sure to sign up for alerts for power shutoffs. Make sure these are based on your address, not your zip code. Zip code is really more meant for unhoused individuals. So each circuit, the way the electrical lines work, right? You'll have one line coming in here, your house might be here. You may think that everyone else is on the same circuit, but they're not. So a zip code alert may be completely wrong for your particular house. And as we've been saying all night, have an emergency plan. Whenever this stuff happens, it generally is around when there's other sort of weather conditions that may be quite dangerous, right? They're turning off the power because they think the power lines might cause a wildfire. It means wildfire risk is high in the area. So you may be in a situation where power goes off and then you get an evacuation warning. So in these situations, make sure you know how you're going to get out, what you're going to take with you, where you're going to go, how to contact loved ones and other social connections. Next slide, please. So what can you do? As the way the system's set up, you have to contact your utility first and try to resolve it with them. So if they, power shut off, they don't give notice, you complain to them immediately, right? Just in general, sending complaints there, it's the sort of, you have to escalate certain levels. Call us if you have problems. This is an area we're active in. We also work with other nonprofits statewide if you're not necessarily in Los Angeles County. We may also be able to help who've been active in this in these utility electrical issues. Complain to the CPUC. If they get flooded with complaints over an issue, they're more likely to act, just very basically. And if it's a discrimination issue, such as on a disability, you can also complain through the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. If it was related to both, I'd complain to both and contact us so we can see if there's some help we can get for you statewide. And I believe that is all for my point of presentation.
Thank you, William. And so I will go ahead and wrap up with our last topic, medical insurance in disasters or states of emergency. And so just beginning with this, I think basic and important question a lot of people have following a disaster is what happens with eligibility and coverage. And so with Medi-Cal, many survivors should be eligible to receive faster decisions and enrollment. For those of us who have applied or been accepted and waited to enroll, we know that there are certain timelines and stay periods. Generally, those will be shortened. And similar to some of the other public services that we covered, specifically in the food preparation, there are less application requirements for Medi-Cal. There is also something important to note that the Department for Healthcare Services will suspend monthly premiums. And so, the focus, understanding is disaster recovery. And so those monthly premiums would be suspended for a short period following that disaster. And so this is really just information for contact, for enrollment and changes following a disaster. Contact your Medi-Cal ombudsman. The number is there. Survivors can request following a disaster through this same number, transfer of services. If residence has changed to a new county, a new city, whatever it might be. People, unfortunately, sometimes may need to relocate from Southern California to Northern or vice versa following a disaster. And so your health plan should not be impacted. There are certainly exceptions that that the state will be able to assist with for healthcare. And so I think specifically following emergencies and disasters, one of the biggest concerns for individuals who have pre-existing medical conditions is the ongoing care, especially for those who have specialized care. And so with Medi-Cal, the DMHC, the Department of Managed Healthcare, requires any enrollee in the program to get medically necessary services. And so that service, if it's urgent, should take place within 48 hours, 96 hours if not urgent. It is important to note that prior authorization is required for those urgent services. So always make sure, call that number, talk to your local ombudsman to see what the process is for that authorization. And then if you are a Medicare recipient, members can generally access out of county after the presidential declaration. Again, those of us who are on government provided healthcare know that the networks are very strict, generally not allowed to go out of network. And if you do, you will pay out of pocket. Following a presidential declaration, if you're on Medicare, again, because the focus is on recovery, making sure everyone can get access to their services, that out of network exception is usually less restrict. And similarly, following a disaster, if it's a fire, earthquake, you lose your house, a lot of times prescription drugs, other medical supplies are lost. We generally know if you are on medication, there are limitations for the amount. For Medi-Cal, following disasters or states of emergency, recipients can receive increased supplies for drugs, understanding that having individuals go out often following a state of emergency is not the best idea. So increasing that prescription drug supply to reduce the amount people need to leave. And then again, with the Medicare on that exception, it does allow out of network access and does limit those very strict federal limitations for accessing prescription drugs. And then lastly, knowing that many people are uninsured for several reasons, if it is, and this is important to know, if it is a federally declared, so that is federal only, so those areas can access prescription drugs, supplies, any other medical goods or items through the Emergency Prescription Assistance Program. And again, the number to learn more is on the screen there, and that also allows you to locate pharmacies that participate in that federal program. And then the last kind of chunk of assistance for the medical insurance and other medical issues following a disaster is requesting FEMA assistance. I do just want to start this slide by saying we understand that FEMA assistance, a lot of this disaster recovery work is something that you would be doing obviously after you experience a disaster or other traumatic event. And so these applications, whether it's federal, state, if you need assistance, if you are unsure if you're doing it right, please call our team. You'll get our information again in a few slides. But we do want you to know we're not throwing this information and simply saying good luck. If you ever need any assistance, please call our office and we will certainly help however we can. With FEMA assistance, however, the ONA program, the other needs assistance, similarly can provide those required medical supplies if it is specifically caused by a disaster. It's important to note that FEMA services are only going to be provided following a presidential declaration of a disaster. And so FEMA will not be there if it is a local fire that's impacting 2 or 3 homes in your neighborhood. This is for those larger scale disasters where federal assistance is seen. With that being said, though, FEMA does award grants for medical dental expenses. So it is not just, medical only surgeries. If it is dental related, you can certainly access FEMA assistance still. And then there is, important to note, the critical needs assistance, and that is a one-time lump sum $500 payment given by FEMA directly to the recipient. And that is just for the general life-saving and sustaining items. So that's whether it's medical needs, basic food, water to survive, that is an available one-time payment. And so with that, like I said, we here at the Disaster Assistance Project at NLSLA certainly hope that none of you need to experience or go through disaster recovery. But if you do, if someone you know is going through that process, please let them know that they are not alone. We are here. Our team is made to help people going through that situation. And so please give us a call. The phone number is on the screen. I will read it. For those who are having a hard time seeing it, it is 800-870-0732. Again, please continue after this presentation to stay in touch with NLS, find out more on our work, other presentations we're having and work we're doing in the community. Please check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then lastly, for any other questions, I will leave this slide up here for you. And we have both the disaster relief hotline that is specifically for our team here. And then we do also have the general legal assistance hotline. If you have any issues or questions with one of the various fields and topics that we mentioned previously, please give us a call. And with that, thank you for joining us. I know we only have about a minute left. If there are any questions in chat, please put them there. Otherwise, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you to Jacob and Will. It doesn't look like there are any questions, which is not a big surprise. Thank you all for tuning in on this, and hopefully got some useful information out of this. As Drew mentioned, our office is here for you on a number of issues outside of disaster assistance. If you have anything related to housing, public benefits, workers' rights, healthcare, education issues, clean slate, please give us a call. We are here to provide services for you. And a big thank you to Assemblymember Rivas and for her staff for allowing us to join them this evening with this presentation. Wish you all a great evening and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.